Dear students, welcome to the second lecture on epidemiology. Today we are going to talk about other important outbreaks in near past, and then we are going to see how our environmental understanding helps us tackle with these human public health problems. So let's start about cholera cases. Now cholera is a very infectious disease. The sad thing about cholera is that it is very easily avoidable just by having proper sanitation. So when we talk about cholera, it is very important for us to understand that cholera outbreak is a result of failure of sanitation, because cholera has a fecal oral route of transmission. So let's say we have a carrier in a community who has cholera in their gut, and then when the person defecates in the fecal matter, the cholera will be present. Now cholera lasts very long, and it requires very little amount of cholera pathogens to cause someone healthy to fall sick. So if we can effectively contain the fecal matter, so we have a very good waste water collection system. First of all, there is no open defecation, because if we have open defecation, then the flies will pick up the cholera microbe and then Vibrio cholera and then infect other people. The other thing we need to have is proper waste collection system. Waste water collection system actually. Next, we don't want open drains. So if there are Vibrio cholera in the open drains, we do not want that. So our waste collection system should be not open, so perhaps concrete or other pipe system through which our waste and septic tank waste is collected. Next, we need extremely good hygiene. So people wash their hands after they poop. So because let's say I am a carrier of cholera, and after defecating I am cleaning myself, I do not wash my hands, then whatever surface I touch, I will deposit Vibrio cholera on them. And then if somebody else comes and touches them, now that person has been exposed to Vibrio cholera. Remember, it requires very little infectious dose of Vibrio cholera to infect a healthy individual. So hygiene standards are very high, so means there is no water shortage, because washing hands, making sure our hygiene is good requires a lot of water, good quality clean water. Next, we need extremely good water treatment facilities. So let's say it is not a human, but it's an animal that's a carrier of cholera, and then that animal defecates in the raw drinking water surface body source. So the surface body that is the source of our raw drinking water. And if we do not have adequate disinfection system, adequate water treatment system, then the cholera Vibrio cholera can spread through water distribution network. Next is we require a very robust robust high integrity water distribution system. So let's say we treat our water really well, we collect all the fecal matter, we treat it perfectly, there is no Vibrio cholera roaming around in our surface water bodies, and we put it in our water after treating water, giving adequate residual disinfectant, we put it in our distribution system, and there is a leak, and guess what pathogens enter through the leak? Vibrio cholera. And now people will fall sick, get cholera. So we need robust and high integrity water distribution system. And the next thing we need after is that we need to keep our clean environment. So if you look at these factors that are necessary to make sure there are no cholera outbreaks, you will note that many of them are actually environmental challenges. These are exactly the problems that the environmental engineers and environmental scientists in our country are trying to tackle. We've definitely, and now our government is also promoting Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, and a big part of it is sanitation, putting an end to open defecation, very good. Next is we need to have a very good wastewater collection system. Many cities, for example, I am sitting in Roorkee right now. Roorkee is now finally, after so many hundreds and hundreds of years, is getting its wastewater collection system. And then we still have the problems of open drains in most part of the country, so we need to get rid of this. Open drains are not only a problem when it comes to infectious diseases like cholera, they are also a problem for vector-borne diseases such as malaria, dengue and chikungunya. Then hygiene is very important, and this is where India is struggling a lot. Our water shortage does not allow us to maintain a very good hygiene, does not allow us to use water judiciously and cleanly. So this is something we really need to work on. Next is our water treatment systems. Usually across the country in our cities we have good water treatment systems. The problem may be in their operation and maintenance. So that is something we really need to look for. We need really responsible, strong, high integrity water professionals, environmental engineers, sanitation engineers who work in our wastewater treatment system and water treatment system, make sure they are being operated and maintained properly. Also we need to do a lot of research into understanding what are the factors that cause the deterioration of our water distribution network, and we need to keep our environment clean. If we do all of this, then we won't have cholera case. And that is why typically developed countries that have already done all this business and are doing it really well even now, they don't tend to have cholera outbreaks. Now in recent past, cholera has come back into news because of its re-emergence after the refugee crises in Syria, in Yemen. Many of them have got infected by cholera, and in fact I encourage you to go ahead and read a book called Guns, Germs and Steel. I think that is what it is called. I will have to confirm, I will share it in my notes later. So in this book people have shown how many of the wars were actually won not on basis of the combat potential and the combat power of the countries, but on basis of the diseases that they spread. For example, many I think it was the World War II, maybe World War I, when Germans were invading Russians. By the time they reached Moscow and by the time they covered the important parts of Russia, many of them had perished in the cold and because of diseases. Same thing is happening right now in Yemen and in Syria, where we have an unprecedented amount of refugees running away and going to refugee camps. Now refugee camps don't have sanitation facilities. They don't have enough water for people to maintain the hygiene. We don't have a good fecal collection system, a treatment system. So as a result, we have a lot of waterborne diseases that spread, and one that's making rounds right now is cholera. So let's look at the recent past of cholera. We note that in 1989, 1990, peaceful years by the way, mostly peaceful, we had a very low level of cholera. And then from 1991 to 1999, we noticed that the global incidences of cholera increased, and we have not gone back to pre-1990 levels of cholera even now. So in purple we have Americas, in yellow we have Asia, in green we have Africa. So this is when the violence escalated in Africa. We had refugees, and you see the incidences have topped. Same thing in America. South America is very, very violent even now. And whenever, this is very interesting, whenever we have large displacement of people, they do not have access to adequate facilities, and we have an outbreak of diseases such as cholera. It happened in Haiti. It's happening in Middle East, in Syria and Yemen. And India right now, as I am recording this lecture, is suffering from, not India, but this part of our Indian subcontinent is suffering from mass displacement of Rohingyas from Myanmar. Now there is a very high chance that in Bangladesh and wherever their refugees go, we will have cases of diseases such as cholera. So if we look at this, this is definitely an environmental challenge, as I have mentioned here, environmental problems, but it has a very strong political component to it. Now this is very important for you to understand that whenever you have some kind of political problem going, there is a very good chance that our environmental systems are failing, and that is when the environmental engineers step in, and that is when we start taking precautions to make sure people do not fall sick. Alrighty, so this is Yemen, the recent cholera outbreak, and this is a map showing how the cholera incidences have increased. The first wave happened in 2016 when we noticed that there was a persistent level of cholera, but recently in 2017 the second outbreak when it started, now the number of cases are very high, very high. So look here, some 70% of population of Yemen got displaced. That's an extremely high population. 8.8 million people were displaced, and some of them returned, some of them went elsewhere, and then we had cases of 65,300 incidences of cholera, and 532 people lost their lives because of cholera, not because of war. Alrighty, so now let's come back to our epidemiology, and well, before we get here, I like to stay here and talk to you about a little bit more about these infectious diseases. So in case of cholera, the fecal oral route is very well recorded and reported. So we know, okay, if there's a cholera outbreak, we need to look at our wastewater treatment, we need to look at our water disinfection and hygiene, get these three in order, and then you put an end to cholera outbreak. But in certain diseases, we are still investigating what is the source of pathogen here. For example, in Shimla in 2016-2015 winter, there was an outbreak of jaundice, and when National Institute of Virology, Pune, typed the virus that was causing the jaundice, it was found that it was hepatitis E virus. Now, hepatitis E virus has a fecal oral route. So, if a person is sick or a mammal is sick, has hepatitis E in their fecal matter and contaminates the water, contaminates the food, or just practices poor hygiene, then other people will fall sick by consuming the materials that are contaminated, whether it is water or food. Now, in this outbreak, it was very important for us to figure out where is this hepatitis E source coming from, because when there was a full blown outbreak and at least 2,000 people were reported confirmed cases of hepatitis E, were at least 2,000 cases were confirmed to be of hepatitis E, and we do not know how many more. We need to know where did the infection start from, and then the question is, well, how do we find out? So, National Institute of Virology, they had the ability to detect hepatitis E virus, which is very hard to culture, to grow, and they found it in the water system, the drinking water, everywhere in the drinking water system there was hepatitis E virus. And now how did it enter the water distribution system, the water? Then the question is, well, it is a fecal oral route, so we know that, okay, it's present in the water, so not necessarily the food that is being sold in the market, or maybe even that, but the water. So now where did it get in the water from? From the fecal matter. So let's look at our wastewater treatment plants. So that was the next step. They looked at the wastewater treatment plants and they found that 5 out of 6 wastewater treatment plants were not working well. So obviously now fecal oral route has been confirmed. So you looked at the water sources and they found, yes, there is virus in it. Now this is your oral route, the oral part of the fecal oral route. Now let's look at the fecal part, which is your wastewater treatment plants, and they confirm that 5 out of 6 were not doing their job well. So this is where the fecal matter in Shimla, interestingly, at least for Malyana, one particular part of Shimla, the wastewater, the treated wastewater is put into a stream, a khad, Ashwini khad, and then few kilometers downstream the same water is taken as a raw drinking water source. So this is your fecal oral route confirmed, right? So the wastewater treatment plant not working properly, disposing fecal matter in a stream, 6 kilometers down the lane, down the flow, the same water is the source of drinking water treatment plant. Now the question is, alrighty, we have established the fecal oral route, where did the first virus come from? Now in order to understand that, the current research which select scientists are doing in the country right now related to hepatitis E virus outbreak in Shimla is that, well, did the virus first enter the water distribution network, made some people fall sick, which increased the amount of virus loading in wastewater treatment plant, which increased the loading in stream, and then increased the loading in water distribution system. Did the contamination happen first on the wastewater treatment plant part? So that is still being investigated, and this outbreak, this part of the outbreak problem is a total environmental problem, environmental challenge. So again, this brings us to a very important part, that human health is very closely intertwined to environmental health. Now, in case of MERS that we studied just in last lecture, we also note that animals can infect humans, can be a carrier and source of infection. And where do animals get the infection from? From environment. Thus, there is a very close relationship between the humans, animals in our environment and our environment. Alrighty. So, on the same note, we notice that 60% of existing human infectious diseases are zoonotic. So, 60% of diseases, animals also get them. The animals that are in our community, like rats, cattle, chicken, dogs, cats, 60% of our diseases we get from them. Oh yeah, this is the virus, the pathogen. So, pathogen goes in the human body, affects human body. We know that at least 75% of emerging infections, so which were not always a problem, but now they are increasingly become more problematic, like Ebola, HIV and influenza, they have an animal origin. For example, swine flu, first isolated, traced back to swine. Bird flu traced back to bird. MERS traced back to camel. So, at least 75% including HIV traced back to certain monkeys of human diseases that are becoming increasingly problematic and dangerous have zoonotic origins. 5 new diseases for humans appear every year. That's a tremendous rate, 3 of which are of animal origin. 80% of agents with potential bioterrorist use are zoonotic pathogens. Which brings us to another concept, bioterrorism, which is when remember I talked about how many wars were actually won. When the Europeans came to North America and sort of invaded the continent, it was not necessarily their artillery that won them the North American continent, but they in fact were, I would say, cruel enough to intentionally spread diseases. So, they would bring the blankets that were used by patients of smallpox and give it away to native North Americans. And the native North Americans were never exposed to smallpox, they did not have these infectious diseases, and they fell sick and the entire communities were wiped out. It was a very effective and cruel mass genocide. So, this is bioterrorism. I use a biological agent to terrorize and kill entire populations. Same thing happened in world wars. Same thing is happening in Yemen, where 65,000 people have died not because of war but because of cholera. And same thing was attempted after the September 9/11 attacks, when certain important officials in US were mailed anthrax, the powder, the anthrax bacteria, because Americans are sensitive to anthrax. We Indians are immune to it, but not them. Most of us in India are immune to anthrax, but anthrax is a big challenge for Americans, so North Americans. So, this is bioterrorism. 80% of microbes that can be used for bioterrorism are zoonotic pathogens. I hope this slide helps you understand the strong link between the animals and humans. Alrighty, so when we were talking about emerging and re-emerging infections, 70% are vector-borne or zoonotic. So, they are spread either through insects like chikungunya, dengue, malaria, or they are zoonotic like swine flu, bird flu, and now camel flu, MERS. So, we have chikungunya and all other diseases in different parts of the world, avian flu, chikungunya again, yellow fever, Ebola, Zika. This is an old map, so we do not have Zika here. Zika is also a vector-borne disease. So, we have arthropod-borne diseases, we have rodent-borne diseases, and we have other diseases that are also spread through bats, for example, rabies. Alright, so again I hope you understand that human health, many of our infections we share them with animals. Alrighty, so this is the concept of One Health. In One Health we are bringing together human health with environment, and we appreciate the close link of human health with animals. And now we also know that animals, where do they pick the disease from? From environment. So for example, our environment, like our surface water, river, has Vibrio cholera in it, which can cause cholera disease, and some animals pick it up. They drink water from lake, from river, or from a small puddle that has Vibrio cholera microbes in it. Now they get cholera, and when they defecate, now Vibrio cholera has increased. Here let us say we had only 10 to the power 4 cells of Vibrio cholera, now we might have 10 to the power 14, or maybe collective pool might be very large, and now humans will get infected, and now we have a full blown outbreak here. Another example is in environment. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have always antibiotic resistant microbes. So antibiotic resistant microbes are naturally present in environment like soil, because the antibiotics, they produce them, they are used to their presence. Now the animals in many countries including India are given a prophylactic dose of antibiotics. So animals become the reservoirs that actually select out only for antibiotic resistant microbes. So when animals are grazing or eating or drinking water from environment, they are interacting with environment, they are actually selecting antibiotic resistant microbes. So where it was 10 to the power 1, let us say, just 10 microbes in a small sample, now we might have much higher number, depending on the dose of antibiotics and how we are giving them. And now when humans interact with animals, because humans are rearing them, or when we consume their meat, or when we consume their poorly treated milk, or their other body parts, now humans, or we just interact with them, because remember 70% of emerging diseases in humans are zoonotic. When these, and we share a lot of pathogens with animals, now congratulations, our pathogens are resistant, and now we have a major problem of antibiotic resistant microbes, pathogens, antibiotic resistant pathogens. This is the reason why One Health is very important. What it does is it brings together environmental health, ecology, veterinary medicine, public health, human medicine, molecular microbiology, health and health economics under one umbrella to take care of individual health, population health and ecosystem health. So now in One Health, our intention is to make sure that our environment is safe. It is our intention to make sure that our public health is ensured, public is safe, and then our animals are fine too, and they are growing well enough for us to feed us. So in under One Health, we want to ensure all 3 different kinds of health, and we are bringing them together. This is translational medicine, and so human medicine, veterinary science, environmental science, all together come together to ensure One Health. So students, in this course, I hope that you are ready. This course has been designed to prepare you for environmental health part of it, somewhat ecology part of it, ecosystem and molecular microbiology part of One Health. So dear students, this is all for today. In this week's homework, you'll have a lot of questions from One Health and one particular case study of an infection that was traced back to a particular animal. All the best for the homework. That's all for today. Thank you very much.